So tonight, I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to have the pastors are on this panel with us tonight. And I want to start off by saying that this is for my doctoral thesis, and it is the problems that pastors in Pickens County, South Carolina, lack effective strategies to navigate struggles within their ministry. And so I want to say good evening to everybody, and welcome to our panel discussion on the silent weight of ministry. So tonight we'll hear from 4 seasoned pastors who know firsthand the unique joys and deep challenges of shepherding God's people. Ministry is often described as a calling, but it can also be a hidden burden. So one that's not always visible to the congregation, but carried daily by those who serve. So we're honored to have with us Pastor Heath Mullikin, who's leading with vision and passion for spiritual renewal at Alive Wesleyan Church. We have Pastor Heath Mullikin, whose ministry has touched lives through ministering to students on the campus of Southern Wesleyan University. Pastor Chuck Bridges, known for his steady faithfulness and commitment to walking alongside others, but especially me, in different seasons of life. And Pastor Bob Black, whose perspective blends pastoral wisdom with a deep love for equipping leaders. And so each of these men carries stories of both joy and struggle. And tonight they'll help us pull back the curtain on the realities of ministry and life. So our prayer is that their honesty will encourage current pastors and help also equip those preparing to serve in the future. So would you help me welcome them to the panel? So we'll keep our responses concise. I know we as pastors can well, you know. So we're going to keep our responses as concise as we can so we can leave time for audience participation. And we'll begin with 3 main questions for the panel, maybe 4, but then open the floor for questions. Dr. Harold Lewis shared that demands of pastoral work can take a toll on even the most dedicated individuals. And he shared how the role of a pastor is not confined to a set schedule, but they are often on call 24/7. 24/7 to respond to crisis, provide pastoral care, and support congregants in their times of need. And so this call is one that keeps pastors busy and burdened. And so in light of that, our first question is, what are some burdens that pastors carry in ministry that most people do not see? What are some burdens that pastors carry in ministry that most do not see? And I'm going to start with Pastor Keith.
I think they know this. I'm not sure that they recognize, but obviously the people in the congregation, you carry a lot of personal stuff. There's stories that you know. I think every time I get into a pulpit, there's stories that I know that have been brought to me, I've been a part of. And I think back, if I could just quickly share a story. I remember on a weekend back in South Dakota where I just had got done preaching on the weekend, and my wife, I drove her to the driveway and she said, "You need to get to the hospital." We were expecting a couple named Dennis and Chris to deliver their firstborn, and when they went to deliver, the baby was gone. And when I got to the hospital, the first thing that he did is he handed me the baby and he says, "You're my pastor, bring it back to life." And yet it was interesting. In the next hour, I kind of wandered through the hospital hallway, and another couple just gave birth to 2 twins that were both gone. And in a week's time, you're doing 3 funerals, if you will. The next weekend, they're going to walk into church. And yet, in a large church, so many people don't have a clue the fullness of the story. And you're going to preach. And I think those burdens really weigh on you. And then I would add to this, and then there's always this sense that you always feel like you have to be on point. I'm walking into a pulpit. I've got 2 couples that have lost their children. A congregation who many of them have no idea what's just taken place in the last week. And getting in a pulpit and feeling, okay, I've got a mixed group here that are each carrying their own thing. And to get up and preach and those weights, I don't think they know it, but they really know it. and they get it. And you feel like having to be on point. And so those are two that I would just share.
Yeah. Heath, what's your?
This one, I mean, I guess it's obvious, but may not be obvious, is when I transitioned from being a youth pastor to a solo pastor at a small country church, you realize that your livelihood, your salary is based on tithes and offerings in the church. Well, that might affect what I want to preach on a given Sunday. And if Sister Mary doesn't like me, and that means she's going to stop tithing, and that means we may not meet budget, that for a 32-year-old father of three, that was the kind of pressure I was not thinking about. And I think, most people go to work, and how they get along with everybody doesn't often affect their salary. They can, they've got to kind of watch what they do. But for a pastor, that just adds this unique angle to everything. And so you're trying to minister to people, as Keith said, but then you're also trying to preach the gospel. You're trying to preach holiness. You're trying to preach people, hey, you need to live your life right. With, in the back of your mind, knowing, if I step on this person's toes, they may put their wallet back in there. And it's not all about the money, but my children like to eat. And so it's just this balance of trusting the Lord, relying on the Lord, and just in the quiet moments, He helps you wrestle with that tension.
Joe?
Wow. I think for me, the first thing I thought about was just the incredible responsibility that it is when we stand up as God's representative and say, this is what God says. I too brought a story to mind just about 3 months ago. I was around the 1st of June. I was preaching a short series, getting ready to go on vacation. And so I preached this message and didn't really give it a lot of thought. It was kind of winding up a series, thought everything went okay. I go on vacation, I get a call the next Sunday, which I wasn't preaching that Sunday, I was out of town, to find out that a young man whose mother is a member of our church, he was at church the last Sunday I preached. But on the Saturday night before the Sunday they called me, he was in a very bad car accident. And on Sunday they determined that he was brain dead and wasn't going to survive. And they had all these decisions to make. This young man was 27 years old. And I don't know, when I got that call, I immediately called the parents and talked to them on the phone and prayed with them. But as I was sitting there, actually on the dock at the lake, and I just began trembling. Because it hit me. I was the last preacher he'd heard before he left the earth. And his mom told me, she said, he hadn't been in church in a long time, and God was doing some things in his life. He's had some substance abuse. And she said, the whole time you were preaching, he was filling up that note page. She was so excited, and so I don't know, for me, it was just that unbelievable, did I say the right thing? Going back and rehearsing, what did I say? Did I say anything? So I think a lot of times for me is, God, are you sure you want me to do this? I feel so inadequate each time I get up. So that was kind of what came to mind when I thought about that question.
Okay. Dr.
Talk about pastoral burdens, that's a big topic. But just think about the job description, first of all. You're responsible for preaching and teaching. You're responsible for pastoral care. You're responsible for church administration. In a larger church staff, some of that may be shared, but it's still a shared responsibility. And that in itself is a challenge because those are different skill sets, folks. And yet a pastor is supposed to master all of those. Is supposed to be on top of everything with regard to that. But then on a personal level, which is where most of the conversation already has been, it's just multiplied. When you think that there's so many times there is a perception of failure on the part of the minister. May not be spoken by anybody else. You feel it. the people you haven't been able to reach, the sermon that didn't fly, for example. We've all known that. It is, by definition, one of the most challenging calls possible. But then it's not up to us. It's God's grace that makes it work. And so whatever the challenge, He's looking for us to sacrificially do our best, leave the results to Him. It's hard to do. It's hard to do because we tend to take ownership of our failures more than we do anything else.
Yeah. Since you have the mic still, and we've heard some of the things that pastors carry, why do pastors mask that personal pain for the sake of others?
Pastors don't want to be perceived as clueless, right? I mean, you want to be in a position to be able to help. People have to have confidence in you if they go to you for help. The problem is that makes failure all the more personal on our part, and we've already discussed a little bit of that here tonight. It's hard to be honest with ourselves and therefore with the congregation without seeming to denigrate the calling that God's given us. But we're still human. There's still so many ways in which we're not up to the task that we've been given. But God asks us for our best. He does the rest. And in that sense, if we could get beyond looking at ourselves as failures and see ourselves as faithful servants of His to the degree to which His Spirit enables us, I think the outcomes, both personal and congregational, are all going to be much better.
Yeah. Thank you, Chuck.
Yeah, it's, I think a lot of times because in the position, people are coming to you for the answers, and they're coming to you for guidance, especially in their most difficult times of their life. And I think for me too, it's just sometimes the advice I give others, do I take it myself? You know, if I show weakness or maybe I'm struggling with something, and Joey and I haven't served on the staff together, we're able to be much more honest with each other and walk through some difficult times in both of our families' lives. But I think a lot of times, you know, I don't really want to say it's trying to put on a show or act like everything's okay. My wife would say I have one of those faces where you can't really hide. I mean, you know if I feel good or you know if I feel bad. So it's hard for me to fake it. But I think just wanting people I want my faith to be like where I'm walking through my stuff knowing as this brother's, you know, so well put, God's the one that's doing it. He's in charge of it. He put me here. You know, He knows what He's doing. And so I think a lot of times it's just getting me out of the way and being honest. I've been fortunate. I only served 3 congregations in my 29 years as a pastor. And I really got to serve with some people that cared deeply for me and my family and took interest in us and wanted to hear what our prayer needs were. You know, you go to prayer meeting and then everybody's telling me all their prayer requests, but I never tell them what mine are. You know, so I think just letting yourself be a little vulnerable, maybe.
Yeah.
When I was the youth pastor here, we had a teenager who had essentially a brain aneurysm on a Monday night. So I go to the hospital and talk with mom and dad, and it was kind of an up and down week. You know, she woke up, and then I get the call Friday. She had taken a turn for the worse, and Saturday morning she passed away. And through that whole week, and then I think the funeral was on Tuesday, and I got home from the funeral, and just my wife went to bed, and I just remember sitting on the couch and just losing it. And I know that during that week, as I was ministering to students and to that family, it wasn't that I was trying to fake anything. It was that the Lord just carried me. And I you know, people say, "Oh man, you had some words of wisdom." I don't remember what I said. And it was during that week that the Lord just said, "I got you," and He carried me. But in the end, there's this. It just takes a toll on. I'm sure Heath, after you 3 funerals of babies, that it just takes this toll on you. And in the moment, you don't, in the moment you're ministering to people, it's not that you're being fake, it's just the armor of God, the Lord just helps you in that moment. But when it is over, like I said, I had that, I just let it all out and sobbed and had a pretty good conversation with the Lord. What in the world? What's happening? But then having good accountability partners who kept me honest. Hey, how's this affecting you? I think that's, been the thing that's kept me in line for 30-some years, is in the midst of all this and carrying these burdens, having some people who really look me in the eye and ask me hard questions.
That's good.
I'm going to take on just another angle on this, if that's okay. I think all of us would agree in here as pastors, this is the coolest gig on the planet. I really mean that. I get paid every day to talk about Jesus. It's really a cool thing for me. I really love what I get to do. I don't say that to discredit the fact that my heart doesn't get weighted and doesn't get heavy and there's difficulty in ministry. I wrote this down, why do pastors mask? Because I think there's an unspoken expectation is that a pastor must always project strength and unwavering faith. Now, I think there's a truth to that. I'm called the shepherd. The difficulty is this whole vulnerability piece, because I'm still one of his sheep. And it gets a little dicey. And I want to say something just to piggyback, maybe it's a little moment of marketing and advertisement with you, because I love your heart that you want to get pastors together. I think the answer to a lot of our struggles is somehow pastors, we would be true and honest with ourselves, that because I think there's so much, we're so afraid sometimes, it's just almost like we're competing with each other. And we fail to understand that we only have one enemy, and it isn't each other. But what happens to that is I think pastors get isolated, and then we actually, as pastors, create our own problem for one another. Because we're so afraid to bleed. Like, I've been to conferences, and I've had pastors ask me how I'm doing, and I remember one time we had an incredible movement at the altar, and people came to Christ, and it almost seemed like they were disappointed in that. Like, they didn't want to celebrate with me, but the moment that I tell them I'm struggling, all of a sudden they're all ears. It's like, now I can help you, and it's I don't know how to explain it, but vulnerability is a dicey thing. I think from the pulpit, we recognize our calling, and I think we got to be careful not to bleed all over the congregation. I'm not saying I always know what that ground is, but wrapping yourself with other pastors that really, if you will, recognize we're in partnership. We're in this together. We're not competing. When those walls start coming down, I think it would greatly help pastors to know that I have a place to go, that it's safe. This is, if I will, as a pastor, if I could say it this way, I think that it's always disappointing for us when our congregation isn't acting as one. I wonder what it's like for God when he sees his congregation not acting like one. As pastors, and I think if we could learn to do that, it would help a lot, because I need that in my life. I need those people, I need pastors. And so one of the first things I did when I got here was, even before I landed on the ground, I met with Bob Black and I met with Mark Wilson, and I sat down with Fred Andrews and I said, I won't do this alone. And I'm not talking the pastorate. I need a place that I can grow and I trust, and that I'm Heath Lloyd. And that I have a marriage too, and I have a family, and I have a place, and I need you guys. And if I would have felt this room, I can assure you I wouldn't be here right now. Because I need that in my life. We need this in our lives. So.
Yeah. Since this question is, so what do you wish as a pastor your congregation understood about the pressures that you face?
I remember I looked at that question, Joey, and I struggled with this one. Maybe I'm just going to be too vulnerable here. Sometimes I think we want to stand up and let them know what we're really thinking. I can't do that. But I would say this, and it's more of, I'm going to say this again, I love what I get to do. And a change for me is when I came to understand that I like being a pastor, and I'm not asking the congregation from them what maybe they're asking they need from me as their pastor. I like being a pastor. I like being a pastor. And what that did for me, and I kind of wrote it down, is that I recognize everybody in the church, and I would say this to anybody in the room, young pastors coming in, everybody in the church, every weekend they come in, every day, they have an idea what a perfect pastor is. And I can never live up to that because every day they're deciding what that perfection is. And it can be diverse all through the congregation. And so I don't know if I'd want my congregation to know this. I would want to make sure that I have key leaders around to know that I need Jesus too. And I have limits. And I don't wear a Superman cape. If there's an S on my chest, if it's ever there and you see it, it stands for stupid. Because I'm not. I need Jesus as much as they need Jesus. And but I don't know if I would. That would be important for me from the congregation because of who's in the room. If there's a person that doesn't know Jesus, that is in a moment I'd want them to know that. But I think wrapping myself with great leaders around and that they know that, and I can be vulnerable enough to say, listen, as your pastor, I can't do that. That's helpful.
Okay, yeah.
So,
Heath, what's your name?
When I was a youth pastor in North Carolina, my pastor about every like 3 or 4 months would like get sick, like cold or something. And I remember about my second or third month down here as a solo pastor, almost getting the flu. Like it just felt like the flu. And then about 6 weeks later, it happened again. And it's just like flu-like symptoms. You can't. And I called him and I said, man, I'm so mad at you right now. So, and he just chuckled. I said, man, you did not tell me what this job would do to my physical health. And especially if you're not being intentional with what you eat and your exercise and your sleep patterns and having a bedtime and having a wake up time. And so I realized very quickly, the way that I've done ministry before is not going to work now. And because if I'm physically sick, like can't get out of bed sick, obviously I'm no use to the church, but I'm also no use to my family. And so I think if they knew, I mean, there's something about that's, I mean, we haven't said this word, but it's been underlined, that spiritual warfare, it's exhausting. And it just takes a lot out of you. And I think if our congregations know, hey, just sometimes, hey, you call me in the middle of the night, you're at the hospital, 9 times out of 10 I'm going to be there. But Saturday afternoon at 5 o'clock, I need space. And I need you to understand, I need this space so I can be there for you at 3 o'clock in the morning when something bad happens. And so it's just that balance of knowing ourselves, knowing our own bodies and our health, and then just people knowing, I'm not going to bother my pastor, at this time. If it's, I just stubbed my toe and need you to come anoint me with oil. But on those major things, man, I'm there. So, did anybody else get the pastor flu? Is that what it's called? I saw a lot of nods.
I think one thing God, I didn't do this, the Lord did this for me, is He put like 3 pastors in my life real early on in my ministry that we just clicked. I hate to use that word click in church groups, but we just had a lot in common. We hung out, we had similar personalities. We'd go to a conference together and maybe hit a couple of meetings and then we'd go play golf and, just hang out. But what that did for me was we didn't get together and share shop talk. Hey, what are you doing? What are you planning? I mean, we just got together and said, how are you? And it was a safe place for me because I think it just highlighted the fact that if you're not called and you're not in that role, which I consider an unbelievable honor that, I appreciate what Keith said, because I still don't know why God would choose me to do this. It's unbelievable. But the people who are not called or are not in that role, or even those guys that I've known, and I was hesitant to bring some of them in to be deacons, because that's a whole different level of understanding of what's going on in the church. And I have a couple of guys, I think it really messed them up, because they didn't know church people might act like that. And but I guess what I'm saying is, there's that perspective that the person going to church will never understand fully what we are going through. But I guess I try to communicate this, and I want people to know my heart. I want to be there for you as much as you want me to be. I won't be every time, but I can tell you God will. And I think just trying to be honest with people, because the tragic death that I shared a few moments ago, I was out of town on vacation, so I wasn't able to physically go there and be with this family during a very terrible tragedy in their life. But when I called them and apologized, I said, "Why didn't you let me know?" It's like, "Pastor, we didn't want to bother you." Wow, you know what I mean? So anyway, I don't know if that helps.
Yeah. Don't know.
Yeah. This is all indicative of the toll that ministry can take, physically and spiritually, on us, and the importance of staying in touch with the Lord and being a recipient, not just a dispenser of God's grace, so to speak, as the human representative, but a recipient of God's grace, and the ability to lean on Him more than ever, and to lean on each other, as you said, to have that maybe a circle of support from other ministers that is just absolutely critical. I have friends who years ago were pastoring in the same area, so they got together on a regular basis, and then they all went to different spaces. They still get together whenever they can. They'll travel miles and miles to be together, because the bond that was created was a healing kind of thing. And there's that. There is the option of a sabbatical that's possible in terms of pastoral health. But even if not, or in between those times, a spiritual retreat is as important for the pastor as it is for the congregation. We've got Potter's Place not far from here in Central. Great place to meet the Lord. It's dedicated for that. And those who think pastors don't need those times don't know pastors, because it really is a critical point in our own relationship with the Lord, but also in our relationship with the congregation.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Does anybody out in the audience have any questions for our panelists? If not, would you thank them for being here this evening? Thank you for your honesty.